So today we're going to talk about what the final Sean Connery live-action film.
Was it really?
Yeah,
I thought Entrapment was.
Nope, Entrapment was a couple years prior.
Okay.
Yeah, so
All
The
right.
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, apparently the film that killed his love for movies. He only did some voice work after that and then kind of softly retreated into retirement.
Right.
So we're going to talk a Patreon pick today, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and Gentlewomen. Hey, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
Hey, I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks for finding us. Thanks for watching. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continued support of the show. You can follow the show on Twitter and on Instagram. Yes, we do have a Patreon. Check that out for some great deals to tell us some new movies to critique in the future. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours. And today we're doing a Patreon select movie. It is The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
All right, set in an alternate history, adventurer Alan Quartermain has been tasked with recruiting a number of literary characters to stop a criminal known as the Phantom from starting a world war and throwing the Earth into chaos.
So this is based on the book by Alan Moore, who also wrote the graphic novels of V for Vendetta, From Hell, Watchmen, and this one as well. I'm missing another one, of course.
Yeah.
But Alan Moore, later in his life, was trying to make books that were difficult to adapt to film. Mm-hmm. This is kind of like an attempt. He didn't really want to make it a film. He's also been very vocal about his disdain for the film industry. Mm-hmm. And so this is another one that if it doesn't translate very well to film, well, it's because he kind of wanted it to that way as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he's he part-time curmudgeon, full-time writer.
Right. Yes.
Maybe the other way around.
Yes. So this is kind of, if I remember right, his explanation is, what if we have like an Avengers or Justice League in the Victoria era, like 1880s or 1890s, and using celebrity, the superheroes of that era. So
yeah, and I think it's a really fascinating idea. It was like kind of one of those brainbuster ideas when I was a kid, because I remember watching this movie. I didn't know it was based on a graphic novel. I just saw Sean Connery in a movie with a lot of big like CG things. I think they said the director of Blade made this, so I was excited for that.
Yes.
So I kind of went into it with all these ideas. I didn't know it was based on literary characters. So at the time, like when Dr. Jekyll shows up, I'm like, but wait. That's not how Dr. It was kind of that, like, I had to, like, really run my gears in my head to figure out how all these
I would imagine
characters
if you were like, where do these people come from?
Yeah, I, like, knew all the names, but I was like, Mina Harker. I was like, I don't remember that in any of my Draculas,
So it's almost like if the characters after their stories, like Alan Quartermain had a bunch of adventures, as well as a lot of other characters, is the result of their stories lore. Obviously, from this point of view, it looks like Mina Harker got very intimate with Count Dracula because she's now a vampire.
Yeah, which I don't think she was in the original source material. And I think that was one of the things that was either Moore or Kevin O'Neill, who wrote the book with him, kind of both were pretty vocal. Like, that takes away a lot of her character, is that she was strong enough to beat him. But in this, it's kind of like we have to give her like super powers because she's not as strong as everyone else. Like, they were kind of like disappointed. And then I guess I don't mind the change, but I've never read the original book, so
yeah. It's just a bunch of letters, journals. It's hard to read Count Dracula. But like Dorian Gray, it's never established that he's immortal, but it's always been established that he does not age. And it's based on this picture. But here, he's immortal, so it's a little bit relaxed based on the characters. Obviously, Alan Quartermain was kind of like Indiana Jones before Indiana Jones is. In the movie, Tom Sawyer's in the movie, but in the book, he is not.
Yeah, so it sounded like 20th Century Studios, or 20th Century Fox at the time, wanted to have an American character because they didn't think Americans would care about a bunch of non-American characters, which I've always found to be the most silly thing in the world. And if true, then it just makes me disappointed as an American, because like I always say, it's more fun to watch a movie about people who aren't me because it's more fascinating, and it's not that big of a difference.
I don't think so, but we always, film. Everybody who is a producer likes to interject their own point. Can we get this in here? I wonder that. That's always when they have these production meetings.
Yeah, and the toughest thing about the Tom Sawyer character is, again, I don't even know if I realized that on first watch when I saw it back in 2003. And I'd read Tom Sawyer. I'd read like the stories before. Watching it this time was when I actually realized, like, oh, it's Tom Sawyer. Oh, it's that character. I hadn't put those pieces together because they never really say that much about him. He's the least connected from any of the source material characters.
Right, yes. And probably he's the youngest too.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of when we get to our review of see if it's effective using incorporating Tom Sawyer into the story. Of course, it's very much like the Avengers, very much like Justice League, that they all have to assemble to find, to solve one big bad guy who wants to eradicate the end of the world. It's always one of those stories, right?
It's crazy how close it is to the Avengers' actual story. They even have their own ship instead of the helipad. They've got the ship that they're on, but then someone blows.
Don't turn to Mr. Hyde on my ship.
Yeah, and they've got a Hulk. It's shocking how close, not just to the Avengers or the superhero team ups, but the actual Avengers movie.
I agree.
I can't believe there wasn't a lawsuit.
Kind of a pairing, kind of like Tom Sawyer and Alan get along.
Yep.
Kind of like Captain America and
Yeah, he's like a man out of time.
Iron Man. Yeah.
So.
And you got Dr. Jekyll is very scientific, and he can turn into the Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but even the book, Mr. Hyde is not a big, overpowering, menacing people. He's a small, curmudgeon little,
Yeah, so it's definitely got that Alan Moore, I do what I want with the source material idea to it, which I'm always fine with. The source material is made to be played with.
And Mina Harker is very much like Black Widow. I'm thinking this out loud, and Dorian Gray is very much like Hawkeye.
Kind of like Hawkeye, because Hawkeye turned it for a little bit in the movie. It's just a different part of when he was kind of, the more I watched the movie, because I kept pausing going, wait a second, and putting it all together,
hey, it's deceiving. Yeah. So if you want, this is kind of the template.
Yeah. Right? So ignore your Avengers movie. Just watch this again.
So production, they recruited Stephen Norrington, who did a very successful job with Blade.
I think Blade 1 is still my favorite Blade movie. Yeah. I think that's the one. And my wife, she consistently watches the first Blade movie because it goes back to that simplicity of the character, that hard R. We wouldn't have a lot of superhero movies today, I think, without Blade, and yet it's consistently not talked about in that way. So
yeah, and Stephen has a very interesting career because you think after you get Blade that you're all of a sudden you'll be continually working, but he turned down Blade 2. He said, except this. Obviously, him and Sean Connery did not get along very well. Shocker, right? And then, you got a lot of other interesting people. So you have Peta Wilson, who's La Femme Nikita, right?
Yes.
You know her from La Femme Nikita. You get Stuart Townsend, who it's very hard to find that he's still not around. He did so many movies in the early 2000s.
The disappointing thing is, as much as I love Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, knowing that Stuart Townsend had been in that role for a week and then let go from the Aragorn character because he just wasn't gelling in the right movie, that has to be heartbreaking when you think about it from that perspective. He's probably one of the better parts of even Queen of the Damned, which is a movie I don't like. But I think he's pretty solid.
He's very effective in
it. So
there's a lot of problems with that movie, but he's still outshines.
It's not him.
Yeah. And then you have from India, which is Naseeruddin Shah, who's still getting nominated for acting now in India, still making movies. Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of the most downplayed character, but I find him to be the most fascinating in the group and the one I wish we got to spend more time with. Yeah. There's a funny story actually during the work with him, because I guess where they were shooting, he was very popular, and people didn't. The group of actors didn't realize that, so they were going out to dinner one night, and he got seated to the big table in the center, and the owner of the restaurant personally waited on all of them just because he was such a fan of this actor, and none of them had a clue that he was as big of a thing.
You wonder if Sean Connery is like, hey, come on, I'm the.
I was Bond too.
I was Bond too. Right. So I remember reading the comic book. It's very. I would say the nexus is very close to the book. The book takes a long time to assemble. It's very much like V for Vendetta. Alan likes to write, get the bearings, so kind of like The Watchmen. Yeah, takes his time, very much like the book does. The movie does not. The movie likes to go.
Yeah. The thing about Watchmen that's so interesting is that it's 12 parts, as a clock would be, but then each one kind of has its own 3-act structure. Right. So it kind of ebbs and flows a lot like you would have with individual comic books. So, with his kind of structure of writing, that works in that issued, presentation. Very tough to translate and make something that's compelling the entire narrative through, or to squeeze it into little bit under 2 hours.
Right, they squeeze. Another tidbit is the cinematographer who we mentioned before, critiquing other films, and the cinematographer is Dan
Lawson.
Yes,
we talked about Nightmare Alley with, also did Shape of Water.
Right.
So
he did effective. I appreciate the work for Nightmare Alley, Shape of Water. He does work with Guillermo. They seem to get along great. I think Guillermo did he do Blade 2?
He did Blade 2 then, yeah.
But not the cinematographer. Well, Guillermo del Toro did Blade 2.
Yeah,
which got him into the industry. So it's kind of this weird intertwinement.
Yeah, and then of course you've got the big man on campus, the Connery of it all. His final performance here is
turned down Gandalf, but
that apparently is one of the reasons why he wanted this film, is because he read both The Matrix and Lord of the Rings, and didn't really get them, and then passed on the roles. Those two both became giant successes. So the next time he got a script that he was told looked like a winner, and he read it and didn't understand it, he said, "Well, this one will be a winner then." So it sounds like the irony is that like he took this role because he didn't take The Matrix or Lord of the Rings.
Fool me once, shame on me.
Yeah.
Fool me once.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
Fool me three times.
We have an almost Gandalf and an almost Aragorn both in this film.
Almost. So you have production.
Yes, so Carol Spear did the production on this. That was surprising.
Yeah, there's a lot of surprises about this movie, which I'm glad we got to pick because there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. There's a lot of networkings and offshoots, and yes, it's of course Sean Connery's last film.
Yeah, and then I also wanted to mention Tony Curran, who plays Rodney Skinner, an invisible man in the role.
Yeah, they had to change the name because they didn't have the rights for it.
That's what's so funny is they couldn't call him the Invisible Man ever, but they could call him Uninvisible Man. So that was part of it too. Is you can't use the you have to use an N, and you can't use the actual like character name. You have to say, well, he got the formula from someone else, which kind of makes sense. Even in like the Universal horror monsters, because after that first film, it's always someone getting the formula from someone else.
Right.
So it doesn't really hurt it too much.
Plays a part in the script because then you see Dr. Jekyll open up his vials and one's missing. You're like, oh, well, maybe it's Roland.
Yeah.
He likes to steal vials and everything.
Yeah, I think when this movie is at its best, of course, it feels like that perfect crossover. It does feel like that, but there's also some things we'll talk about too.
But going on, I do like the aesthetic of Captain Nemo's whole aesthetic.
Yeah.
You have this certain Victorian, glossy, very high stylized, high class artwork going around the Nautilus and everything. Art direction's fantastic, I have to say.
I think the movie looks fantastic. There's some questionable CGI that has been aged, of course. Time makes fools of all of us. We're not all Jurassic Park. But that questionable CGI will hurt it. But the production itself, looks absolutely gorgeous. I love the Nautilus as a ship. It's going to give the Spaceball ship a run for its money on size.
And how to get in Venice? Well, it's movie logic.
Yeah, there's that question of how can that thing go under the water. You remember that Godzilla poster where they're like he's in the ocean but he's only up to his knees?
Yes.
And they're like, well, this is obviously the same kind of thing. It's like when it ducks under, doesn't it just immediately hit the ground?
Yeah. So after the background, up next is our review of League.
I haven't watched this movie probably since a good run of rentals back in 2003.
Yeah.
I think I rented this movie quite a bit, actually. I was not taken with it, but there was that curiosity that built with me where I just kept finding myself renting it again. Didn't love it, but something kept grabbing at me. And watching the film right now, it's completely flawed. I get it. It's messy at times. But you always hear the legend because, Sean Connery quit acting after this movie. He fell out of love with acting. Stephen Norrington literally did not direct again. It's been 20 years. He's done other work, but he said he would never direct again.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as those legends have you believe.
Yeah, I think it got such harsh criticism, maybe valid, when it came out, because he expected something like a superhero team-up kind of thing. And
they had plans for a sequel where they were going to fight the tripods from War of the Worlds, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So I would say it's a very much, looking back as it aged, it's kind of nice. I give it a nice value.
Yeah.
That there's nostalgia pieces to it I enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a messy script. It's obviously need to be in the oven a little bit longer, the script.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously the script wasn't the vessel because you have a lot of action that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's a goal. It's a roller coaster ride without much to go, with an outline, pretty much.
Yeah. The meat is the characters and not really the story, because the story is kind of a nothing burger, if you will. You get kind of lost just wondering, wait, what's the plot here? I think after the scene where the Nautilus gets attacked, the movie loses a lot of steam, no pun intended.
The bomb. They're searching for a bomb, which is very cliche. We know the results and we know the chase. This is gonna.
And it almost was a precursor to that thing that people criticize Marvel villains for, which is the first Marvel villain for each hero had to be them fighting the exact same version of themselves but evil. So at the end of this film, each person is fighting a evil version of themselves. There's the evil Invisible Man versus the good one. It's kind of that thing where it's it was a precursor to all those flaws.
And you get to who the villain really is, and you're like, we don't care. we get to the point like, eh.
Yeah, I mean, with Richard Roxburgh, I'm such a fan of the Van Helsing movie where he played Dracula.
I know you're a fan of that movie.
Yeah. Like, I saw him in the movie, and I couldn't really remember who the bad guy was, but I was like, it's probably that guy.
But I say the overall, one of the subplots that work is Mina and Dorian Gray's chemistry together.
Mm-hmm.
There is a tension, but also admiration for each other. And it's almost like, I wish that was the movie.
Because isn't she kind of the leader in the book?
Yeah.
I think she's more the one in charge.
More vocally, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe that was kind of the intention on like, the first initial idea was to focus on that relation. Because you're right, it is a very strong element in the film.
Right.
So much so that it makes the addition of Shane West as Tom Sawyer feel completely falling on your face. Because it sounded like they tried to shoehorn him as, like, another love interest. You know, he's like checking her out on the boat and everything.
Yeah, they're going to try to test the water of a love triangle because those will work, but it's just not going to be effective. But she says, "You're young and cares something like you're young and charming, and I hate both of us." Or something like that. Yeah, right. So that was an effective chemistry. I wish we had a little bit more of that.
Yeah,
but you have to move on with this assemblage that everybody has to get equal amount of screen time, and it seems like they were trying to make sure that's correct rather than see if anything gels.
Yeah,
there's that amount of lines and all that.
There's that difficult like middle ground you have to find because I'm sorry to say there are more movie watchers than book readers. And so people going to see a movie about literary characters, even as superheroes and stuff blowing up, there's going to be that disconnect with people who don't know the characters.
No, I'm not going to shame them for a roller coaster ride with an outlined script.
Yeah.
But that's what to get them in there. Yeah. But
yeah.
You just have to have something a little bit more tangible. If we want to empty escapism, something a little more daring almost.
This movie reminds me so much of the first Suicide Squad, where we have a team of characters that I really like, but they're on a mission that I don't care about at all.
Yeah.
You know, like the story is not there, but the squad itself is something. The League is something I really enjoy.
Well, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, obviously this Mina and Dorian have a history together, and you don't really know about it. But I want to find out more about that. That's more interesting.
Yeah,
yeah.
And I like
Were you
elements
guys boyfriend
of,
girlfriend. What the heck?
You know, Jason Fleming as Dr. Henry Jekyll and of course Mr. Hyde. I like that ability where he could like look in the mirror and see himself, and he had the conversations where they were both in the room. I thought that was really visually compelling.
Yes.
And almost where like Hyde had become kind of a brother in some ways to Jekyll, where that they were a team, because he kind of warns him like there's some, you know, when he hears the ringing and he's like there's something going on, you need to get out of here before you transform. Like I dig that kind of stuff. I like a lot of the characters in the movie. I just wish that their mission was better.
Something a little more interesting.
I'm almost more interested in seeing what that sequel would have been, fighting Martians. You know, it's just because it's so gonzo that maybe it would have worked better.
Right, and I think it just like almost like we need a car chase in here. We need a ship, and working on more of the aesthetics than really what's behind the aesthetics.
Yeah.
Because I really like the look of it.
Mm-hmm.
I like the aesthetics of this whole movie. There's nothing behind it. It's all a nothing burger, really. Right. I wish they had a better mission.
Yeah. And because when you get to the end, I just feel like, I mean, I'm 48 hours, I think, removed. I think I watched it 2 days before we recorded. I'm having trouble remembering
the ending,
like the plot after that, the Nautilus attack.
Right, yeah.
Just because there's a lot of explosions there and people are kind of running around. And again, I'm facing an evil version of myself. It just, there's so much stuff that happens at that ending that I feel like there's a good story in this movie, but it's underneath layers of minutia that really drag away from it. And of course, the sequel tease that even though we didn't get a second one, still didn't feel like it would have worked if we had gotten a second one with the doctor like praying at the grave and stuff. Like, it's just missteps, you know, that felt like studio trying to overproduce a franchise.
And yeah, especially with a movie when it seems like what they're trying to do is force it rather than just let it organically happen. Mm-hmm. Like these, how Avengers is effective, we already know their personalities before they came together.
Yeah, that film had the benefit of a lot of them had their own movies too, where like we already had well fleshed out characters by the time we forced them in.
Yeah, and with this one, a lot of people have never read those books. They don't really know the backstory before they come together.
Yeah, I had a similar thing with this recent horror film called The Invitation, which is very much a vampire Dracula riff. And they have this is obvious from the trailers that it's they're hiding it, but it's of course Dracula. And they keep hinting at like the Harkers, and they hint at like the Van Helsings, but they do it in a way where I don't know that people who aren't really steeped in the lore would notice that. And it felt like you had to like that movie, and that's why I didn't like that movie. This one kind of feels the same thing, where it's like yeah, if you don't know Jekyll and Hyde, if you don't know, especially Mina Harker, because she's not even like the top 2 or 3 characters in that book.
No,
or not,
it's
especially
more
not even the
Jonathan,
most.
right.
Yeah. So it's that difficult thing, and they call her Wilhelmina too, which even like for me was like, wait, oh yes, of course. Like, there's all these things where you have to kind of prep yourself, and I don't think it's grasping. I think it goes back to that idea of Alan Moore wrote a book that works as a book, and I think there is something that could work as a movie. I mean, I think Hulu right now is working on a new adaptation of this as a series. That sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, you'd have to slowly introduce one by one.
Yeah.
Before they come together.
Yeah.
Right. And we understand when you come together, you're not going to all get along. But
no, I think that's, again, those interpersonal relationships are the movie's strongest suits.
Yeah.
Whether they like each other or completely hate each other.
But I have to say, after a couple of years removed, I'm a little more nicer to evaluating this movie than I was. I was really disappointed.
Yeah. I think the stronger elements of the film do outweigh the negatives only slightly. Yeah. But there's just not enough meat to go on if you're looking to make your franchise. There's a reason that Blade had 2 sequels and this film did not. Norrington knew how to start a franchise, but it's just like studio interference, and probably shouldn't have cast a Sean Connery in this role, I think. I really actually think he's quite good in the movie, but he just didn't work well with others, especially younger directors who don't have that kind of standing. I don't know.
There's too many what-ifs, and then that's what makes a good movie. We don't say those things.
Yeah, we don't care that they're there.
Right. So, obviously, this is a Patreon Select review.
Yeah. Thank you, Tyler Prohl, for picking this one. This is actually another great pick that I hadn't even thought of, that I'm so happy we got a chance to talk about today.
I'm glad we talked about another Alan Moore story. So it goes, once you investigate Alan Moore, there's a lot of other movies we can kind of talk about. Yeah.
So maybe give us your thoughts on the next Alan Moore adaptation that we should
Hell,
talk about.
Watchmen, V for Vendetta.
Yeah, they run the gamut. Some
Killing
I
Joke,
love,
you
some
can do
I
the
like.
Killing Joke too.
Yeah. So let us know down below which Alan Moore adaptation we should cover next on the show. And your thoughts on the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I mean,
put a comment down below. It helps out the show.
Yeah, and make sure to check out that Patreon. Join us like Tyler Prohl, and you can pick one of our next episodes too, which we love to have because there's a lot of movies and only 2 of us.
And not a lot of time.
Yeah, so thank you guys for joining us. You can find all my film reviews over at goatfilmreviews.com.
You can find my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.
All right. Let's go join the leagues.